Phone versus camera. This is a conversation we often see on YouTube. But how does a phone stack up against a Micro Four Thrid camera that is from 2017, so quite an old generation already? Let's find out in this video, comparing the Panasonic Lumix GF9 to the Xiaomi 17 Ultra and the Vivo X200 Ultra. Now, there's a reason why I'm starting here in the forest, and that's simply because of the forest being one of the hardest subjects to really shoot with a phone. Because of course we are dealing with a much smaller sensor on a phone compared to a camera like this, and that's one part of the conversation that I really want to showcase when it comes to this kind of comparison between a camera with a Micro Four Thrid or a camera with a 1" or 1/1.28" sensor size. So we're gonna do it with both the Xiaomi 17 Ultra and of course the Vivo X200 Ultra. Either way, let's showcase the difference here. Now, because we are using different phones and of course different approaches in mobile photography, this video will be focusing on showcasing auto mode and pro mode. So when you see a frame around the shot itself on the phones, it's shot in auto. When you don't, it's shot in manual. Naturally as well, we are dealing with different focal lengths on the Xiaomi and the Vivo as well, and you will have situations where the shot isn't perfectly the same between all three, which is because of those differences in hardware, and then I try to find a bit of a middle ground here where I can. So while composition matters, here and there you will see some differences. We're trying to showcase what the phone processing does versus the camera. And naturally, with phones like these, the main sensor can go up to 15 megapixels with the Xiaomi on the main sensor, where with the Vivo you can do that on all sensors. However, I will limit that in this showcase. And naturally, for those RAW files, I will be uploading them for the members as well. You will have then a bit more of those mixed shots in between, because in cases I simply needed the shot fast, and therefore some shots look just too far off for a comparison like this. And on top of that, when using Pro mode, naturally you are limited to their native focal lengths. Now for this first shot, as stated, I'm starting in this forest/failure style. This is to showcase the difference in colors, but also to showcase the difference in focus. Where even with shots where it feels far less focused on the subject, you can tell that the Micro Four Thrid does have a better focus on that subject. But also gets more natural details. This means that if you crop into the shot itself, you will also see in a comparison with a 50 megapixel resolution that it isn't really losing out in comparison to it. Not all megapixels are built the same. A larger sensor simply has a big benefit to it. And when it comes to using this Panasonic, I'm using a somewhat basic lens with an f-stop of 3.5 to 5.6. There are simply better lenses out there. This lens also goes from a 12mm equivalent to a 32mm equivalent. But because of the difference in the sensor size, those focal lengths are not reflected on what you would have on your phone. But credit where credit is due, because while phones don't directly compete with it, it honestly does do really well. Details on both the Xiaomi and the Vivo are really solid, and in terms of using Pro mode, they're excellent on both of them. And you gotta give credit there, because naturally, this isn't just a camera, they are more than that. And well, yes, I could use different lenses on this Panasonic Lumix GF9, with phones those different focal lengths are built into it, and that's a benefit you cannot look past. Though in turn again, when using auto mode on a phone, you can see what I've always talked about with phone photography versus a camera. On a phone you can see a lot more processing compared to what you would get on a camera. And if you don't mind it, it's fine, but you can definitely tell the difference between these shots. Now, naturally, one argument you can have when it comes to a phone versus a camera is that a camera isn't as pocketable as a phone. Not to mention that a phone has more features than just a camera.
that's something of course that you gotta keep in mind. But with this GF9 having a Micro Four Thrid and of course quite a small size as well, making it quite pocketable as well, makes it a really solid argument for me to have with me on trips, especially for AWOL.
Sharpening, one of those subjects I often talk about. On phones they tend to do this quite a lot, to give you the illusion of details, but it really isn't there. Natural details do not need that much sharpening to make you see those details. This again is where sensor size comes to play and makes a big difference. And in a city like Amsterdam, with those beautiful old buildings with a lot of details, you can see what I'm talking about quite clearly. The Panasonic doesn't sharpen like the phones do, while retaining a lot of details. And of course, the Vivo does sharpen more than I would like to see in my own opinion. Don't get me wrong, again, preference is going to come to play, but I'd rather have the ability to add sharpness than to remove it, which is a lot harder to do. And something that I also noticed during this trip is that while Xiaomi should excel at phone photography in these kinds of setups, especially with that beautiful sun and contrast in the shot itself, giving me a result of that moody shot, in Amsterdam, in these kinds of shots, especially this one, I felt like it disappointed a little bit more. And it's something that I need to keep an eye on, because that is where Xiaomi should excel, and it really didn't. Sadly, I didn't capture the same shot with the Vivo, because the weather just wasn't there to keep that consistent sunlight there. One thing to keep in mind before I showcase video recording as well is that when it comes to the Panasonic Lumix GF9, this was officially released back in January of 2017, and video recording wasn't the biggest focus there, and especially when it comes to 4K recording. With that out of the way, let's showcase the difference in video recording as well. Now, a quick video comparison between all three of them to showcase the difference in terms of the background blur. Now, do keep in mind, when it comes to the Panasonic Lumix GF9, that's using a pretty basic lens on it, and therefore it's about an f-stop of 5.1 out of my head and using 25mm equivalent, where I'm using 35 on the Vivo and 35 on the Xiaomi as well. So the composition would be pretty similar between all of them. Of course, they're naturally not all at the same position, and therefore you will get a difference here and there, but do keep in mind that there are some differences. Look at the background to see the difference in bokeh on the background. Now, of course, when it comes to using the Panasonic Lumix GF9, you can change lenses, and therefore you can change, for instance, the f-stop and have much more of a blur in the background when using those lenses. So do keep that in mind when it comes to this comparison and showcasing the difference between all three of them. Alright, now also a quick showcase of using Pro mode and then changing the settings a little bit around. 4900 Kelvin for all three of them in terms of the warmness of the shot itself. 1/100 and 1/100 for the Xiaomi and the Vivo, and of course using ISO about 500 out of my head. When it comes to the Lumix, it's the same setting and using an f-stop of 1.5 again, because when using this kind of focal length, which is about 25mm equivalent, you will get that of course the f-stop cannot go as low. 3.5 is the max, and then you will naturally get a lot more blur. But either way, these are the settings then for all three of them when it comes to using Pro mode in that terms of video. So at the end of this video, of course, a comparison between a camera on a phone versus a Micro Four Thrid camera. There are going to be quite substantial differences in terms of approach, and that's one part that we have to keep in the conversation. Often when it comes to phones, people use auto mode, but of course you do have Pro mode, and therefore I'm showcasing the differences there as well. One thing we have to keep in mind as well when it comes to using this Panasonic Lumix GF9 is that we are using a pretty basic lens. You can get a lens on it with a higher f-stop, you can get different zoom lenses on it because it uses the standard Micro Four Thrid lens mount, and therefore there will be differences you can create with, for instance, more of that blur background for video and so on. And therefore that's a part of the conversation that I cannot properly elaborate here as well, because of course I just have this lens on it. But do keep that in mind when it comes to this kind of comparison between these phones and of course the Panasonic Lumix GF9. nonetheless, at the end, I found this a very interesting comparison between what you get on phones versus a Micro Four Thrid. The biggest thing that stands out for me is that, of course, naturally, when it comes to phones, there's a lot more processing compared to what you would get on a proper camera like this Panasonic Lumix GF9. And that Panasonic is kind of the style that I really like as well, and it's something that I want to go back to. Because, of course, before I started using the Canon R8, I used the Panasonic Lumix S5, but it just had poor autofocus, and that made me switch to Canon. But honestly, I really want to go back to Panasonic because it's my kind of style when it comes to photography and videography. Either way, I do hope that you enjoyed this different style of video. Let me know in the comments below what you think about it. And of course, before we leave, I really want to thank my members. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. And of course, for you guys, again, more of our files will be available between the phones and of course this Panasonic Lumix GF9. And if you want to become a member, you can by clicking the link below. Oh, and if you want to see a comparison between the Vivo X200 Ultra and the Panasonic Lumix GF9 in a separate video when I get that device, and of course the Oppo Find X9 Ultra, let me know in the comments below. Either way, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and everything, and talk to you guys in the next.